The tabloid's gaze, media sensationalism, and public perception in the JonBenet Ramsey case. First introduction. The JonBenet Ramsey case as a media spectacle. The chilling discovery of 6-year-old JonBenet Ramsey's body in her family's Boulder, Colorado home on December 26, 1996, following a reported kidnapping and ransom note, plunged the nation into a profound mystery. Her death ignited a complex investigation that continues to generate intense public and media interest. The case's unique elements, a child beauty queen, affluent parents, and a perplexing crime scene, set the stage for decades of speculation and unanswered questions. This tragedy unfolded not merely within the private walls of the Ramsey home, but under the relentless glare of public scrutiny and media speculation. Society's engagement with stories of crime, particularly those involving domestic spaces and children, is a complex phenomenon driven by a fundamental human quest for meaning and control in the face of the inexplicable. The media's influence on public perception of crime is immense and multifaceted, and in the JonBenet Ramsey case, it became a powerful shaper of collective reality. Both social media platforms and traditional news outlets contribute to the overrepresentation and sensationalism of crime, leading the public to perceive criminal activity as more prevalent and threatening than actual crime data suggests. This phenomenon is often driven by financial incentives, as increased viewer engagement allows media outlets to raise advertising prices. This creates a self-reinforcing feedback loop. The public's inherent fascination with crime is exploited by media through sensationalism, which in turn amplifies public fear and anxiety, creating a demand for more such content, further distorting perception. The media, while seemingly providing information, acts as a powerful shaper of collective reality, often prioritizing engagement over accuracy, a chilling reflection of how public narratives can be manipulated. This report will analyze how specific gossip magazines, namely People, The Globe, and The National Enquirer, through their sensationalized reporting, exploited the inherent.
Want to give another shout out, and by the way, thank you for everyone liking the contribution to Basil 206 for the contribution. Really much appreciated. Thank you so much. Got to give you a big hug. Hope you're doing well. Say hi to the fur baby 4B, and I hope you like this next video.
Contradictions in the Ramsey family's accounts intensified the psychological toll of trauma and ultimately distorted public perception, creating a fragmented and often manipulated truth. The enduring public fascination with the JonBenet Ramsey case stems from its compelling closed-room mystery elements, where a crime occurred within a seemingly secure domestic space without clear signs of forced entry. This inherent ambiguity transformed average individuals into armchair sleuths, eager to piece together the perplexing puzzle from the information provided by the media. The lurid details surrounding the child beauty queen's death, combined with the affluent background of the family, created a narrative ripe for public consumption and intense speculation. This societal need for meaning in the face of the inexplicable inadvertently amplified anxieties and perpetuated a distorted understanding of the tragedy. The case became a cultural touchstone, constantly re-examined and debated in various public forums. The economic incentives driving media sensationalism played a critical role in shaping the public narrative of the JonBenet Ramsey case. Increased viewer engagement and readership directly translate into higher advertising prices for media outlets, creating a powerful financial motivation for sensationalized content. This commercial imperative often led to a prioritization of engagement over accuracy, as dramatic headlines and speculative theories proved more profitable than nuanced reporting. The resulting self-reinforcing feedback loop meant that public fascination with the crime was actively exploited, amplifying fear and anxiety, and in turn generating further demand for sensationalized content. This cycle ultimately distorted public perception, making it difficult for the public to discern factual information from speculative narratives. The pursuit of profit thus became a significant factor in the manipulation of collective reality surrounding the case. Online communities, such as Reddit forums and web sleuths, emerged as extensions of this media sensationalism, further amplifying theories and blurring the lines between fact and speculation. These platforms provided spaces for armchair sleuths to collectively analyze evidence, debate theories, and share their interpretations, often reinforcing pre-existing biases. While some users genuinely sought truth, the decentralized nature of these forums meant that unverified claims and outlandish conspiracy theories could gain significant traction. Discussions on Reddit, for instance, often reflected the sensational media coverage, with users debating the credibility of deoxyribonucleic acid evidence or the implications of the 9/11 call. This collective engagement, though democratic, sometimes devolved into echo chambers where sensational narratives were perpetuated, further complicating the public's understanding of the case and the family's innocence. The sheer volume of discussion, regardless of its factual basis, contributed to the case's enduring and often distorted presence in the public consciousness. Second, People magazine, the mainstream gaze on a family in crisis. People magazine, a prominent mainstream publication, quickly became a significant voice in the coverage of the JonBenet Ramsey tragedy. Its initial 1997 story framed the event around the shock of a perfect family shattered, describing JonBenet as a lovely child who had won the local Little Miss Christmas beauty pageant. The article highlighted the uncommon devotion between Patsy and JonBenet, portraying them as the perfect mother and the perfect daughter, while John Ramsey was presented as a successful computer executive. This early portrayal aimed to capture the idyllic image that would later be starkly contrasted by the unfolding mystery. However, even in its early coverage, People magazine introduced elements that would fuel public suspicion. The publication noted the peculiar circumstances of the crime, specifically a ransom note demanding an oddly precise sum of $118,000, but with no sign of a break-in, and only family members known to have been in the house. This immediate juxtaposition of an apparent kidnapping with an undisturbed crime scene within the home quickly led to speculation in the media that someone close to JonBenet, perhaps a family member, was involved. The magazine highlighted actions by the Ramseys that did not help dispel such suspicions, such as their decision to hire criminal lawyers, a private investigator, and a public relations consultant just 4 days after the murder. This was often juxtaposed with their stated emotional state, which investigators reportedly found shocking given their decision to grant a very difficult 45-minute interview to CNN on January 1, 1997. Patsy's public statement on CNN, "There is a killer on the loose. If I were a resident of Boulder, I would tell my friends to keep your babies close to you. There's someone out there," directly contradicted Boulder police assurances and likely contributed to early suspicions. People magazine extensively reported on the controversy surrounding Patsy Ramsey's 911 call. It highlighted the 911 operator Kim Archuleta's perception that Patsy's frantic tone immediately stopped and that the call seemed rehearsed. Archuleta also claimed to hear 2 voices in the room, maybe 3 different ones after Patsy thought she had hung up. People detailed how CBS's The Case of JonBenet Ramsey 2016 brought in investigators Laura Richards, a former Scotland Yard behavioral analyst, and Jim Clementi, a retired FBI profiler, to analyze the call with noise reduction, claiming to hear an adult male say, "We're not speaking to you," an adult female ask, "What did you do?" and a smaller voice, speculated to be Burke, ask, "What did you find?" While People did not explicitly use the term pseudo-experts itself, it reported on these interpretations as coming from a team of experts, lending them a veneer of credibility. The magazine did, however, note that Burke and John dismissed the theory as pure fiction and that the FBI and U.S. Secret Service were unable to decipher any translation of the alleged voices. When a mainstream publication like People reports on controversial interpretations, such as the rehearsed 911 call and alleged voices even, if it includes disclaimers about official agencies being unable to decipher them, it still grants these theories a significant level of mainstream legitimacy. This elevation from fringe speculation to a topic worthy of mainstream discussion amplified early suspicions of family involvement for a broad audience, making it harder for the public to dismiss these theories outright. People's coverage evolved to reflect the ongoing investigation and public discourse. Early on, it emphasized the uncommon devotion between Patsy and JonBenet too, but it also prominently featured JonBenet's pageant images. The magazine highlighted videos showing JonBenet dancing in flirtatious, even provocative fashion, and photographs of her in heavy makeup more suited to a woman at least 3 times her age. This imagery, widely disseminated by People and other media, contributed significantly to the stage mother narrative. The magazine also touched on the possibility of Burke feeling slightly left out due to JonBenet receiving all the attention, subtly introducing internal family dynamics as potential elements of the tragedy. People also reported on the Ramseys' later efforts to clear their names, including John Ramsey's statements about the police not investigating the case properly and the family never being charged. People magazine, despite its mainstream status, played a crucial role in shaping early public perception by subtly introducing elements of sensationalism. Its initial perfect family framing of the tragedy immediately set up a dramatic contrast with the unfolding mystery, creating a compelling narrative for readers. The magazine's early reporting on peculiar circumstances, such as the ransom note with no sign of a break-in and only family members present, directly fueled public speculation about internal involvement. People also highlighted the Ramseys' decision to hire criminal lawyers and public relations consultants just days after the murder, which was presented as suspicious behavior. This mainstream coverage, even with its more restrained tone compared to tabloids, effectively legitimized initial suspicions for a broad audience. By presenting unsettling facts without explicit accusations, people allowed readers to draw their own negative conclusions about the family. Such reporting, while seemingly objective, laid the groundwork for deeper public mistrust and sustained engagement with the case. People's detailed reporting on the controversial 911 call further exemplifies its contribution to media sensationalism. The magazine extensively covered the 911 operator's perception that Patsy's frantic tone immediately stopped and that the call seemed rehearsed, amplifying these unsettling details. People also reported on the alleged voices heard after Patsy thought she had hung up, including those speculated to be John and Burke, despite official agencies being unable to decipher any translation. The magazine's coverage of the CBS docuseries, which brought in investigators to analyze the call, lent a veneer of credibility to these controversial interpretations. This mainstream platform's discussion of such theories elevated them from fringe speculation to topics worthy of widespread public consideration. Even with disclaimers about official agencies' findings, people's detailed accounts made it harder for the public to dismiss theories of a staged event or family involvement. People's focus on JonBenet's pageant life, while seemingly factual, inadvertently fueled the stage mother narrative and public judgment, contributing to the family's negative image. The magazine prominently featured images of JonBenet in elaborate outfits, high heels, and makeup, which were then widely disseminated. This imagery, combined with the rumor and gossip surrounding Patsy's involvement in pageants, swayed public opinion towards believing the Ramseys were involved in something sinister. Media commentators, as reported by People, even publicly ridiculed JonBenet's participation, accusing her parents of presenting her in an overly mature manner. This exploitation of her image, promising scandal and mystery, became a primary driver of the media frenzy and significantly contributed to the public's negative perception of the family, irrespective of their guilt or innocence. The magazine's narrative, though not as overtly accusatory as tabloids, still contributed to the public's fascination, turned into judgment regarding the Ramseys' lifestyle choices. Third, the tabloid vortex, the Globe, and National Enquirer's sensationalism. The JonBenet Ramsey case proved to be a fertile ground for the more aggressive and less restrained forms of journalism found in tabloids like the Globe and the National Enquirer. These publications actively engaged in crafting accusations and amplifying wild theories, often with little regard for verification or ethical boundaries. Crafting accusations and wild theories. The Globe, a prominent tabloid, played a significant role in promoting the intruder theory, while simultaneously fueling accusations against the family. It highlighted Detective Lou Smith's belief that an intruder was responsible, citing evidence such as a drag mark on the bed suggesting JonBenet was incapacitated by a stun gun, a theory the police allegedly tried to downplay. Smith's theory directly contradicted the police's tunnel vision that Patsy killed JonBenet over bedwetting, a theory the Globe implicitly or explicitly dismissed as implausible, given the complexity of the garrote used. The Globe also reported on the key piece of DNA evidence of foreign male, unidentified DNA found in JonBenet's underpants, mixed with her blood. However, despite promoting the intruder theory, the Globe, like other tabloids, also contributed to the family's negative portrayal through sensationalized reporting. The National Enquirer engaged in highly aggressive and often legally challenged reporting. In October and November 1997, it published articles that directly implicated Stephen Miles, a neighbor. The Enquirer's cover screamed, "JonBenet bombshell, Dad, we know who did it, exclusive interview. With man Ramsey say killed JonBenet," with an internal heading, "Mommy and Daddy, we know who did it." These articles quoted an unnamed source close to the Ramseys claiming John Ramsey believed Miles was the killer and had been accused of a past offense involving a minor. The Enquirer also labeled Miles an addict. Miles subsequently filed a lawsuit against the National Enquirer for libel, slander, outrageous conduct, and intentional infliction of emotional distress. This lawsuit exposed the Enquirer's reliance on potentially false sources and its willingness to publish highly damaging, unverified claims, which the court later noted were inadmissible hearsay against Ramsey. Tabloids like the Globe and National Enquirer were fertile ground for the most outlandish theories, leveraging them for shock value and sustained interest. These included theories that JonBenet was abducted and killed, with her beauty pageant experience making her a target for those involved in illicit activities. Another popular suspect was Michael Helgoth, a local junkyard owner who allegedly made suspicious comments about cracking a human skull and whose family owned a junkyard. The bizarre, debunked theory that JonBenet was attacked by a wild animal, such as an owl, also found its way into circulation. Perhaps the most outlandish conspiracy theory suggested that JonBenet is still alive and secretly pop superstar Katy Perry, a theory previously applied to Lady Gaga. These theories, while easily debunked, indicate the lengths tabloids would go to maintain public fascination and generate sales. The Globe's approach extended beyond mere sensational reporting, delving into deliberate and systematic engagement in illegal and unethical checkbook journalism. The publication of stolen autopsy photos of JonBenet Ramsey, illegally purchased by a private investigator working for the Globe, exemplifies this. Furthermore, the Globe reportedly paid computer hackers to illegally pull credit card records to track John Ramsey's shopping habits, explicitly looking for anything, incriminating. The Globe's editor even claimed the publication had more of an interest in proving the Ramseys were guilty than the Boulder Police Department or the Boulder County District Attorney. This reveals a profound disregard for privacy, legal boundaries, and ethical reporting in its pursuit of sensational stories, actively undermining the integrity of the media landscape surrounding the case. This active malfeasance, driven by the pursuit of profit, contributed significantly to the public's distorted understanding of the case and the family's character. Tabloids like the Globe and National Enquirer actively engaged in checkbook journalism, paying for stolen autopsy photos and illegally obtaining private financial data to find incriminating evidence. This profound disregard for privacy, legal boundaries, and ethical reporting demonstrated a deliberate intent to manipulate the narrative and prove guilt, rather than simply report facts. The Globe's editor even admitted their primary interest was in proving the Ramseys guilty, surpassing that of the police or district attorney. Such aggressive and illicit tactics severely undermined the integrity of the media landscape surrounding the case. This active malfeasance, driven by the pursuit of profit and sensational headlines, contributed significantly to the public's distorted understanding of the case and the family's character. The constant barrage of unverified claims and illicitly obtained information created a pervasive climate of extreme distrust around the Ramseys. These tabloids aggressively promoted interpretations from individuals or groups labeled as pseudo-experts, whose conclusions often contradicted official findings or lacked scientific consensus, lending them undue credibility. The amplification of theories, such as the rehearsed 911 call and alleged voices, created deep public suspicion, despite official agencies like the FBI and Secret Service being unable to decipher them. This was exacerbated by police feeding false stories to the media, aimed at smoking out the Ramseys, directly shaping public perception. A 1997 Gallup poll showing 70% of Americans believe the Ramseys were guilty illustrates the profound impact of these narratives on public trust in the family. The media, especially tabloids, let the tabloids take the lead and then reported on their reporting, further muddying the waters and creating a distorted collective reality. This early media-driven public conviction became incredibly difficult to reverse, even with later DNA evidence. Online forums and communities, like Reddit and web sleuths, became echo chambers for these sensationalized theories, where users actively debated and perpetuated narratives, often without critical evaluation. Reddit, for instance, has dedicated forums for uncovering the truth about JonBenet Ramsey, where discussions often reflect and amplify sensational media coverage. Users on these platforms frequently engage in amateur psychological profiling, interpreting Burke's nervous smile or Patsy's rehearsed 911 call as signs of guilt, further entrenching public divisions. Some users express frustration with the official investigation, speculating about police contamination of DNA or deliberate cover-ups, which aligns with tabloid narratives. This collective online sleuthing contributes to a fragmented truth, as unverified theories gain traction and become part of the public discourse, making it harder to distinguish fact from speculation. The constant re-examination and debate in these forums ensure the sensational aspects of the case remain perpetually alive in the public consciousness. C. Exploitation of JonBenet's image. Tabloids relentlessly exploited JonBenet's image as a child beauty queen. They distributed photographs and videos of her in elaborate outfits, high heels, and makeup at 6 years old. Some media outlets reportedly slowed down tapes to make her movements look suggestive and doctored photos with eyeshadow, heavy lipstick, and rouge, transforming something innocent into something ugly. This commercial use of her image, promising scandal and mystery, was a primary driver of the media frenzy. The focus on JonBenet's pageant career directly fueled the pageant mother or stage mother narrative surrounding Patsy Ramsey. This portrayal, combined with rumor and gossip, swayed the public to believe the Ramseys were involved in something sinister. This fascination turned into the judgment, and the judgment was, I would never let my child do that. Media commentators even publicly ridiculed JonBenét's participation, accusing her parents of presenting her in an overly mature manner and using highly offensive and demeaning language on national television, which was deeply upsetting to Patsy. This exploitation of her image contributed significantly to the public's negative perception of the family, irrespective of their guilt or innocence. Tabloid headlines and accusations from 1997 to 2001 significantly shaped public perception of the JonBenet Ramsey case. People magazine's 1997 story, while initially framing the tragedy around a perfect family, immediately introduced peculiar circumstances, like the absence of a break-in and the ransom note, leading to early speculation in the media about family involvement. In 2016, People reported on the CBS docuseries analysis of Patsy's 911 call, highlighting the operator's perception that it seemed rehearsed and the alleged voices on the line, which elevated theories of a staged event and family involvement into mainstream discussion, even while noting official agencies couldn't decipher the voices. Throughout 1997 to 2001, People's focus on JonBenét's pageant imagery, including flirtatious, even provocative fashion and heavy makeup, alongside subtle mentions of Burke feeling slightly left out, fueled the stage mother narrative and introduced internal family dynamics as potential elements of the tragedy, influencing public judgment about the family's character. The National Enquirer, in October and November 1997, directly accused neighbor Stephen Miles as the killer with headlines like "JonBenet Bombshell, Dad. We Know Who Did IT," claiming John Ramsey believed Miles had been accused of a past offense involving a minor and was a drug addict. This generated sensational headlines and led to libel lawsuits, exposing questionable journalistic ethics. The Globe, from 1997 to 2001, promoted Detective Lou Smith's intruder theory, citing evidence like a stun gun and a drag mark, which countered the police's family did it narrative and highlighted foreign male DNA, creating division in public opinion by presenting conflicting expert views. The Globe also amplified craziest theories such as the Katy Perry identity conspiracy, Santa Claus involvement, and an owl attack, maintaining sustained public fascination through bizarre and outlandish claims that prioritized shock value over factual basis, further distorting the reality of the investigation. In January 1996, the Globe exemplified extreme checkbook journalism by publishing stolen autopsy photos of JonBenet Ramsey and paying hackers to illegally track John Ramsey's credit card records, demonstrating a deliberate intent to prove guilt and manipulate public perception through illicit means. Fourth, contradictions under the tabloid glare of fragmented truth. The persistent contradictions within the Ramsey family's accounts became a central focus for tabloids, which amplified and often exaggerated these discrepancies to fuel suspicion and maintain public interest. This relentless scrutiny contributed significantly to a fragmented and often distorted public understanding of the case. The 911 call made by Patsy Ramsey was a primary target for tabloid exploitation. Tabloids seized upon the 911 operator's perception of Patsy's tone as immediately stopped and that the call seemed rehearsed. They also amplified claims of alleged multiple voices, including Burke's, after Patsy thought she had hung up. This directly contradicted the Ramseys' assertion that Burke was sound asleep. The Globe even analyzed Patsy's word choices, just gone versus missing, as indicators of deception, suggesting she was trying to minimize her actions. The sensational claim of a mysterious 911 call, made 3 days before the murder, where police were denied entry, added another layer of pre-existing suspicion and implied a pattern of secrecy. The public, generally unfamiliar with the complex psychological responses to acute trauma, likely interpreted rehearsed as deceptive or premeditated, rather than a potential manifestation of emotional dysregulation, dissociation, or a desperate attempt to regain control under overwhelming stress. This misinterpretation, fueled by tabloid sensationalism, served as a foundational element for the family did it narrative, creating a powerful cognitive bias that made it exceedingly difficult for later, more nuanced psychological explanations of their behavior to gain traction in the public mind. The handling of the ransom note also provided ample material for media scrutiny. Patsy's ambiguity about her initial contact with the note, whether she picked it up or just leaned over, versus John's firm recollection of her giving it to him, was heavily scrutinized. Tabloids highlighted initial handwriting analysis suggesting Patsy's authorship, despite later expert opinions finding a very low chance. The fact that the note was written on a pad and with a Sharpie from the Ramseys' own house added further layers of uncertainty and fueled the inside job narrative. The question of Burke Ramsey's awareness during the critical early morning hours was another point of significant contention exploited by the media. The conflict between the parents' consistent claims of Burke being sound asleep and Burke's own later recollection of hearing his mother going psycho but staying in bed was a prime target for tabloid speculation. This discrepancy, coupled with the disputed 9/11 audio, led to chilling implications of eavesdropping or playing sleep. The CBS docuseries, heavily reported by media, even posited that Burke accidentally killed JonBenet after a dispute over pineapple, a theory that led to a significant lawsuit from Burke. John Ramsey's movements and searches in the early hours of December 26th also contributed to the complexities of the investigation and were widely reported. His multiple, unescorted movements and searches, particularly his initial solo trip to the basement where he found a broken window and suitcase, and his later handling of JonBenet's body, removing duct tape, carrying her upstairs, were widely reported as significant contamination of the crime scene. Tabloids underscored how this compromised crucial evidence and fueled suspicion, making it difficult to differentiate between pre-existing conditions, like the broken window John perhaps had broken months earlier, and evidence related to the crime. Tabloids thrived on these contradictions, presenting them as evidence of guilt or cover-up. This created a powerful feedback loop where each new discrepancy, real or perceived, was amplified, further solidifying public suspicion and eroding trust in the family's authenticity. This relentless focus on inconsistencies, often without providing full context or acknowledging the impact of trauma on memory, transformed a fragmented truth into a distorted public narrative. Disputed evidence points in the JonBenet Ramsey case were heavily influenced by media interpretations, particularly from tabloids, significantly impacting public perception. Regarding the 911 call audio, despite the FBI and Secret Service being unable to decipher alleged voices, People magazine reported on CBS's investigator analysis claiming to hear John, Patsy, and Burke's voices, and the operator's rehearsed perception. The Globe and National Enquirer amplified the rehearsed perception, with the Globe analyzing Patsy's word choices as signs of deception and reporting a mysterious 911 call days before the murder. This fueled suspicion of a staged event and family complicity, creating a cognitive bias that Patsy's call was deceptive rather than a trauma response. For the ransom note handwriting, initial indications suggested Patsy might have written it, though later experts found a very low chance, and a federal court ruled it highly unlikely. People magazine highlighted initial suspicions and the note's origin on Patsy's pad, while the Globe and National Enquirer emphasized the note's origin from the Ramsey home and initial indications of Patsy's authorship, reinforcing the inside job narrative. This contributed significantly to the initial public belief that a family member wrote the note, making it difficult to shift suspicion. Burke's awareness was another contentious point. His parents consistently claimed he was sound asleep, but Burke later recalled hearing Patsy going psycho but staying in bed, and the FBI Secret Service were unable to decipher his voice on the 911 call. People magazine reported on CBS's investigator claim of Burke's voice on the 911 call and the docuseries theory of Burke accidentally killing JonBenet over pineapple. The Globe and National Enquirer amplified eavesdropping, playing sleep implications, and promoted theories of Burke's direct involvement, leading to his defamation lawsuit. This placed immense psychological burden on Burke, transforming his trauma response into a focal point of suspicion and leading to public accusations. Crime scene contamination, resulting from John's multiple unescorted searches, finding a broken window, and handling JonBenet's body, severely compromised evidence. People magazine reported on John's actions as detrimental to the investigation, while the Globe and National Enquirer highlighted them as significant contamination, fueling suspicion of a cover-up or deliberate obstruction. This created a lasting public perception that the crime scene was intentionally compromised, shifting focus onto the family's actions rather than an external perpetrator. Finally, regarding DNA evidence, unidentified male DNA was found on JonBenet's clothes, and family members were excluded, with the DA clearing the family in 2008. People magazine reported on the DNA findings and the Ramseys being formally cleared, but also noted a former police chief's skepticism. Despite acknowledging foreign male DNA, the Globe and National Enquirer continued to push family theories, for example, bedwetting or outlandish alternatives. This persistent contradictory narrative, despite scientific exoneration, continued to fuel public division and skepticism. The media's portrayal of the 911 call specifically distorted public understanding, becoming a cornerstone of sensationalism. The operator's rehearsed perception of Patsy's tone, amplified relentlessly by tabloids, was interpreted by the public as deceptive or premeditated, rather than a potential manifestation of acute trauma. This misinterpretation, fueled by sensational headlines and speculative reporting, served as a foundational element for the pervasive family did it narrative. It created a powerful cognitive bias, making it exceedingly difficult for later, more nuanced psychological explanations of their behavior to gain traction in the public mind. The sensational claim of a mysterious 911 call made 3 days before the murder further implied a pattern of secrecy and pre-existing suspicion, adding another layer of intrigue. This relentless focus on perceived deception, rather than the chaos and disorganization of a crisis, solidified public mistrust in the family's innocence. The media effectively weaponized a mother's distress against her, turning her raw grief into a public spectacle of suspicion. Similarly, the handling of the ransom note and Burke's awareness were distorted by media sensationalism. Patsy's ambiguity about her initial contact with the note, combined with its origin from the Ramsey home, fueled the inside job narrative, which was widely amplified by various media outlets. The shifting conclusions of handwriting analysis, from initial suspicion of Patsy's authorship to later exoneration, contributed significantly to public confusion and mistrust in the investigative process. Burke's own conflicting recollections of hearing his mother going psycho versus his parents' claims of him being sound asleep became a prime target for tabloid speculation and dramatic interpretations. The CBS docuseries theory of Burke accidentally killing JonBenet after a dispute over pineapple, heavily reported and sensationalized, led to a significant lawsuit, demonstrating the media's willingness to push unproven theories for ratings. This constant amplification of discrepancies, often without providing full context or acknowledging the impact of trauma on memory, transformed fragmented truths into a distorted public narrative. The media's relentless focus on these inconsistencies solidified public suspicion and eroded trust in the family's authenticity, regardless of the actual evidence. Online forums and communities such as those on Reddit and web sleuths actively engaged in dissecting these contradictions, often reinforcing the sensationalized narratives. Users frequently debated the rehearsed nature of Patsy's 911 call, with some citing statement analysts to argue for deception, despite official FBI findings. The alleged voices on the 911 call, particularly Burke's, became a persistent point of contention, with online discussions amplifying the eavesdropping or playing sleep hypothesis. Similarly, the inconsistencies in the ransom note's handling and Patsy's handwriting were endlessly scrutinized, with amateur sleuths often favoring theories of family involvement over an intruder. These online discussions, while providing a platform for public engagement, often lacked the critical rigor of formal investigation, leading to the widespread acceptance of speculative interpretations. The collective nature of these forums meant that a single, unverified theory could quickly gain momentum, further solidifying a fragmented and often biased public understanding of the case. Fifth, trauma and public perception, the human cost of tabloid scrutiny. Tabloid narratives profoundly impacted how the public perceived the Ramseys' grief and coping mechanisms, often misinterpreting or pathologizing their responses, thereby adding a secondary trauma. The intense public scrutiny transformed their private anguish into a public spectacle, where every reaction was dissected and often weaponized. Patsy Ramsey's emotional state in the wake of JonBenet's death reveals a significant personal burden. While John Ramsey vividly described Patsy's reaction to finding the ransom note as a scream of panic, indicating his immediate awareness of her overwhelming distress, her panicked and frightened state. During the 911 call, coupled with the 911 operator's perception of her tone as rehearsed, was often presented by media as suspicious, rather than a manifestation of acute trauma and emotional dysregulation. Her documented reliance on medication for anxiety and depression was mentioned but often overshadowed by accusations, further isolating her in the public eye. The raw expression of a mother's profound love and fear of unimaginable loss, such as Patsy's statement that she would have nothing left to live for if she lost Burke, was interpreted by some as a motive for a cover-up. This framing represents a profound misrepresentation and a weaponization of grief. Such a powerful bond, when confronted with catastrophe, could naturally lead to an overwhelming protective instinct, a desire to shield a child from any perceived harm, even the harsh glare of suspicion. The media's portrayal of this sentiment as a motive for murder or cover-up pathologized a normal, albeit extreme, human reaction to crisis, turning a protective instinct into a sign of sinister intent. John Ramsey's actions in the immediate aftermath, such as commanding Patsy to call 911, checking on Burke, and his independent basement search, revealed a pattern of focusing on immediate logistical tasks. This logistical focus was interpreted by some as a lack of emotional engagement or even complicity, rather than a common coping mechanism under extreme stress, where individuals may prioritize concrete actions over emotional processing. The observation by Officer Linda Arndt that she did not see John or Patsy interact with each other for a period after police arrived, despite experiencing a shared catastrophic trauma, was highlighted by media as a psychological chasm or lack of mutual comfort. This perceived emotional distance further fueled suspicion about their relationship and potential shared guilt, implying a deliberate separation rather than individual coping mechanisms under duress. Burke Ramsey, as a child survivor of a profound family tragedy, faced a unique and complex psychological burden, compounded by intense public scrutiny. His own recollection in a June 1998 interview with Detective Schuler, stating, "I heard Mom like going psycho, but no, just stayed in bed," directly conflicted with his parents' consistent assertion that he was sound asleep and undisturbed. This discrepancy, coupled with the disputed 911 audio, led to chilling implications of eavesdropping or playing sleep. His perceived inappropriate emotional responses, such as chuckling and grinning during his Dr. Phil interview, were widely reported and interpreted by pseudo-experts as a lack of concern, implying knowledge or complicity. This public judgment, rooted in a simplistic understanding of childhood trauma, for example immature defense mechanisms such as denial, intermittent grief, transformed his personal trauma response into a public spectacle, fueling accusations and lawsuits. This relentless scrutiny, coupled with the eavesdropping playing sleep hypothesis, placed an unimaginable burden on a child survivor, creating a narrative where his grief was not only questioned but pathologized and weaponized in the court of public opinion. The media's portrayal of crime, often sensationalizing external violence, contributed to a societal blind spot regarding the pervasive issue of domestic harm, which is often hidden behind closed doors. By constantly pushing the narrative of an external intruder, or conversely, a dramatic internal family rage, for example, the bedwetting theory, tabloids inadvertently diverted attention from the complex, often subtle dynamics of potential domestic issues. This misdirection of fear perpetuated a societal discomfort with the idea of harm occurring within the home, making it easier to accept sensationalized, externalized threats. Patsy Ramsey's grief was profoundly weaponized by media sensationalism, turning her private anguish into public suspicion. Her raw expression of love and fear for Burke, stating she would have nothing left to live for if she lost Burke, was twisted by some media outlets into a motive for a cover-up, a profound misrepresentation of a mother's protective instinct. The media's relentless focus on her rehearsed 911 call, rather than acknowledging it as a potential manifestation of acute trauma and emotional dysregulation, further isolated her in the public eye. Her documented reliance on medication for anxiety and depression was often mentioned but overshadowed by accusations, preventing a compassionate understanding of her suffering. This relentless public dissection of her emotional state, driven by the media's hunger for a compelling narrative, added a secondary trauma to her already immense grief. The media effectively punished her for not grieving in a publicly acceptable or easily understandable way, fueling the narrative of her complicity. John's and Burke's coping mechanisms were similarly misconstrued and sensationalized by the media. John's logistical focus in the immediate aftermath, prioritizing concrete actions like checking on Burke and searching the basement, was interpreted by some as a lack of emotional engagement or even complicity, rather than a common stress response. The observation that John and Patsy did not interact much with each other after police arrived was highlighted by media as a psychological chasm, fueling suspicion about their relationship and potential shared guilt. For Burke, his perceived inappropriate emotional responses, such as chuckling and grinning during his Dr. Phil interview, were widely reported and interpreted by pseudo-experts as a lack of concern, implying knowledge or complicity. This public judgment, rooted in a simplistic understanding of childhood trauma, transformed his personal trauma response into a public spectacle, leading to accusations and lawsuits. The eavesdropping playing sleep hypothesis, amplified by media, placed an unimaginable burden on a child survivor, creating a narrative where his grief was questioned and weaponized in the court of public opinion. Online communities, including Reddit and web sleuths, actively engaged in amateur psychological profiling of the Ramseys, amplifying misinterpretations of their trauma responses. Users often scrutinized Patsy's 911 call, debating whether her tone indicated deception or genuine panic, frequently concluding the former based on rehearsed perceptions. Burke's behavior, particularly his nervous smile during interviews, became a focal point for speculation, with many online commentators interpreting it as a sign of guilt or social awkwardness rather than a trauma response. These discussions, while offering a space for public engagement, often lacked professional psychological insight, leading to widespread mischaracterizations of the family's coping mechanisms. The collective nature of these forums meant that such misinterpretations could quickly become entrenched, contributing to the family's public vilification regardless of the actual evidence. This online scrutiny added another layer of secondary trauma, as the family's private grief was continuously dissected and judged by a global audience. Sixth, the Ramseys' counter-narrative and legal battles in the media arena. In the face of relentless media pressure and public suspicion, the Ramsey family actively sought to shape the public narrative and clear their names. By 2000, they actively sought to shape the public narrative in response to the pervasive media portrayal of their daughter as an oddly mature-looking child beauty queen and Patsy as a stage mother. Their efforts included the release of their memoir, The Death of Innocence, accompanied by a publicity campaign, as their attempt to tell their side of the story and publicly assert their innocence. In May 2000, they held a press conference announcing that lie detector tests confirmed their innocence, with John stating, "We shouldn't to have to prove our innocence, but nevertheless, we've been forced to," and expressing a lack of trust in the Boulder police. However, because the test was not conducted by the FBI, its results were not accepted by investigators, meaning this public declaration did not clear their names in the eyes of law enforcement. The Ramseys also aggressively pursued legal action to combat negative portrayals and accusations. In March 2001, Patsy and John filed an $80 million libel lawsuit against former Boulder police detective Steve Thomas, writer Don Davis, and their publisher over a November 2000 book that implicated them in the murder. The parties later reached an undisclosed settlement in March 2002. This lawsuit was a direct action by the Ramseys to combat negative portrayals and accusations against them in the media. Similarly, Burke Ramsey filed a defamation lawsuit against CBS for its 2016 docuseries, The Case of JonBenet Ramsey, which alleged he accidentally killed his sister. He reached a settlement in 2019, the terms of which were not made public. Despite these legal efforts and the Ramseys' attempts to control their public image, public sentiment remained divided and the case unsolved. The Boulder Police Department, in 2001, acknowledged public anxiety for a resolution, but stressed the need to protect the integrity of the case by presenting limited information. They continued to investigate leads and collect evidence, including hair, blood, and handwriting samples from family members. The case continued to be a subject of intense media scrutiny, with reports questioning how the police had handled the investigation and accusing various members of the Ramsey family. John Ramsey claimed that a relentless campaign of leaks, fed mostly to the nation's tabloids by some in the police department, had a devastating effect on public opinion, convincing the public of their guilt with false accusations of severe misconduct and involvement in illicit activities. The media's reaction to the Ramseys' counter-narrative often amplified existing skepticism, hindering their efforts to clear their names. Despite their attempts to shape public perception through their memoir, The Death of Innocence, and accompanying publicity campaigns, these efforts were frequently met with skepticism and critical scrutiny by various media outlets. The fact that their lie detector tests were not conducted by the FBI allowed media to dismiss their results, maintaining public doubt about their innocence. John Ramsey's claims of a relentless campaign of leaks, fed mostly to the nation's tabloids by some in the police department, highlight the media's role in disseminating damaging and often false accusations against the family. This campaign had a devastating effect on public opinion, solidifying a perception of guilt in the public mind that was difficult to dislodge. The media's continued focus on their perceived lack of cooperation, despite their public statements and legal actions, further undermined their credibility. The media played a significant role in perpetuating the guilty until proven innocent bias against the Ramseys, even as new evidence emerged. Even after DNA evidence in 2008 formally cleared the family, some media outlets and public figures continued to express skepticism, maintaining the narrative of family involvement. The enduring public fascination with the case, fueled by its unsolved nature, closed-room mystery elements, and lurid details, ensured continued media coverage regardless of scientific findings. Tabloids in particular thrived on the sensational aspects, transforming average individuals into armchair sleuths and perpetuating a distorted reality for profit. This intense public engagement, often driven by a societal need for meaning in the face of inexplicable tragedy, inadvertently amplified anxieties and solidified pre-existing biases. The media's prioritization of engagement over accuracy created a self-reinforcing feedback loop that distorted public perception, making a clear resolution elusive. Online forums and social media became powerful platforms where users acting as armchair sleuths continued to debate and reinforce these biases, often dismissing official findings in favor of sensational theories. Reddit users, for example, frequently discuss the deoxyribonucleic acid evidence, with some speculating it was tainted or contaminated by the cops, rather than accepting its exonerating implications. This skepticism, often fueled by distrust in official narratives, perpetuated the idea that the family was still involved despite scientific evidence to the contrary. Discussions on web sleuths and similar forums often rehashed old theories such as the bedwetting theory, even after they had been largely discredited, demonstrating the difficulty in shifting deeply ingrained public opinion. This collective online reinforcement of sensational narratives ensured that the guilty until proven innocent bias against the Ramseys persisted, regardless of their legal battles or public statements. The digital landscape provided a fertile ground for the continued proliferation of unverified claims, further complicating the search for truth. Seventh, conclusion, weaving threads of understanding. The JonBenet Ramsey case, viewed through the lens of family contradictions, psychological impacts, and evolving public perception, reveals a deeply complex and unsettling human tapestry. The immediate aftermath of the tragedy was marked by significant discrepancies in the Ramseys' accounts regarding the 911 call, the handling of the ransom note, and Burke's awareness. These initial contradictions, occurring in a moment of profound crisis, formed the bedrock of early police and public suspicion, as they deviated from a cohesive, consistent narrative expected in such a tragedy. The profound psychological impacts on the Ramsey family contributed significantly to the observed inconsistencies. Patsy's documented emotional distress and medication use for post-traumatic stress disorder stood in stark contrast to John's professed ignorance of her health struggles, suggesting a psychological chasm within their marriage. This lack of intimate awareness, whether due to denial or compartmentalization, undermined her ability to present a unified account. For Burke, the loss of his sister, coupled with the relentless public scrutiny of his perceived inappropriate emotional responses, transformed his personal trauma into a public spectacle. The disorganizing effects of acute grief and trauma on memory and narrative cohesion offer a nuanced perspective on the Ramseys' inconsistencies, suggesting that their fragmented reality under duress contributed to the difficulties in presenting a clear, consistent story. The public narrative, shaped by intense media scrutiny from 1997 to 2001, continuously fueled speculation and suspicion. The media's sensationalization of the case, exploiting elements like JonBenet's beauty pageant involvement and alleged family dysfunction, created a self-reinforcing feedback loop that distorted public perception. Tabloids, in particular, engaged in aggressive and often unethical practices such as publishing stolen autopsy photos and illegally obtaining private financial data, demonstrating a deliberate intent to manipulate the narrative and prove guilt. This active malfeasance, coupled with police leaks of false stories to the media, contributed to a public conviction of the Ramseys that became incredibly difficult to reverse, even with later DNA evidence clearing the family. The enduring fascination with the case stems from its unsolved nature, the compelling closed-room mystery elements, and the lurid details that transformed average individuals into armchair sleuths. This intense public engagement, often driven by a societal need for meaning in the face of inexplicable tragedy, inadvertently amplified anxieties and perpetuated a societal blind spot regarding domestic harm. In synthesis, the JonBenet Ramsey case remains a chilling testament to the complex interplay of human behavior under extreme duress, the fallibility of memory, and the powerful, often distorting influence of public and media scrutiny. The persistent contradictions within the family's accounts, while potentially rooted in the profound psychological impacts of trauma and individual coping mechanisms, continue to challenge a singular, simple explanation. The case underscores the critical importance of understanding how internal family dynamics, when exposed to the harsh glare of a high-profile investigation, can unravel, leaving a fragmented truth shrouded in enduring uncertainty. The media, especially tabloids, relentlessly seized upon every perceived inconsistency in the Ramseys' accounts, presenting them as definitive proof of guilt or a deliberate cover-up. This amplification created a powerful feedback loop where each new discrepancy, real or perceived, further solidified public suspicion and eroded trust in the family's authenticity. The sensationalized reporting often omitted crucial context, such as the disorienting effects of acute trauma on memory and behavior, which could explain some inconsistencies. This deliberate focus on perceived inconsistencies, rather than a holistic understanding of the crisis, transformed a fragmented truth into a distorted public narrative. The media's insatiable demand for dramatic narratives and compelling villains overshadowed the complexities of a real-life tragedy and the human cost involved. This constant barrage of conflicting information left the public with a deeply ingrained sense of doubt about the family's innocence, regardless of later evidence. The lasting impact of media sensationalism on the case's legacy is undeniable, perpetuating a distorted public memory. The media's exploitation of JonBenét's image as a child beauty queen, often with suggestive or doctored photos, fueled the stage mother narrative and widespread public judgment against Patsy. This commercial use of her image, promising scandal and mystery, was a primary driver of the media frenzy and sustained public interest for decades. Even after DNA evidence formally cleared the family in 2008, the deeply ingrained public perception of their guilt, largely shaped by early media narratives, proved incredibly difficult to reverse. The case remains unsolved, in part due to the initial contamination of the crime scene, but also due to the enduring confusion and bias created by sensationalized reporting. The media's prioritization of engagement and profit over accuracy ultimately muddied the waters, making a clear resolution elusive and leaving a fragmented truth in its wake. The pervasive influence of media sensationalism extended into online communities, where armchair sleuths actively perpetuated and amplified unverified theories, further fragmenting the truth. Forums like Reddit and web sleuths became breeding grounds for speculation, with users often dismissing official findings in favor of more dramatic or conspiratorial narratives. This collective online engagement, while reflecting public fascination, inadvertently contributed to the enduring confusion and bias surrounding the case. The constant re-examination of old evidence and the generation of new, often outlandish theories ensured the case remained a subject of intense public debate, regardless of its solvability. This digital echo chamber reinforced pre-existing beliefs and made it challenging for any definitive conclusion to gain widespread acceptance. Ultimately, the media's sensational approach, mirrored and amplified by online communities, transformed a tragic crime into a perpetual spectacle, leaving the Ramsey family to contend with not only their profound loss, but also a relentless public trial by media. Spectacle, leaving the Ramsey family to contend with not only their profound loss, but also a relentless public trial by media.